Ladies and gentlemen, in a massive break from tradition for meetings like this, we intend to start on time. We're also being filmed, so the revolution is also being televised as well as beginning on time. Hello, my name's Andrew Sims. I'm with the New Weather Institute, and along with Rethinking Economics, we are publishing this evening 33 theses for an economics Reformation. And one of our organisers has gone slightly crazy on eBay. You might see quite a lot of these. And it struck me that...
They're going to increase in price.
Exactly. It struck me that you could almost leave our critique at this, because it has been said many times in the past that one of the problems with mainstream economics is that when the only tool you have is a hammer, all problems look like nails. I also like the fact, because Steve has kind of got ahead of the game before we're sort of nailing the theses, is already in the outfit, which allows me to use the phrase "to get a monk on" in a very, very specific. That's a dialect joke. You might not all get that. Anyway, I wanted to say, as we approach this evening, I was reminded of an old line, an old light bulb joke actually, about how many socialist workers does it take to change a light bulb. The answer is you don't change it, you smash it. Now, the reason that came to mind is because ours is not like that at all. Ours is a very, very polite revolution. And when you get a chance to look at the theses, you'll see that we even go as far to honour Neoclassical Economics for having made a contribution. But I'll be very careful to not say what that contribution has been. We also say that it's been useful, though not for what. But for all the bluster and the tenacity of the economics mainstream, we think the writing has long been on the wall for its rather dogmatic doctrine, and we believe it's time to nail new theses to its door. Neoclassical economics can neither account for the world as it is, nor produce a programme capable of addressing the epochal challenges of social inequality, economic instability, and climatic upheaval. So this is our call for a new realism in economics, one that engages with real people, real markets, and the real world on whose ecosystems we depend, not, at best, their unrecognisable mathematical abstractions. You'll notice that we have 33 theses. Yes, Martin Luther had 95. That you might take as being an example of degrowth. Not that I'm suggesting everybody would advocate degrowth on our panel. Martin Luther was a fantastic and rather interesting and quite an extreme character, really. One point that people might not realise is that it's extremely likely that he never nailed his theses to any door at all. It seems he was a bit vague about what he actually did do to get his ideas into circulation, other than sending them to the church. But we are going to nail ours to a door, more of which later. Martin Luther was obviously opposed to the corruption of the Catholic Church and the selling of indulgences. Modern day equivalent, of course, being something like, I don't know, carbon offsetting or something like that. Now, apart from the Reformation, we also have Martin Luther to thank for the fact that we still have Christmas to look forward to. Because back in the day, you got your presents on December the 6th, and how bad would that be? Christmas would already be over. So not only do we have him to thank for the Reformation, but the fact that we've still got Christmas to look forward to. Thank you, Martin Luther. He got a bit extreme in old age as well, and his turn of phrase was notoriously vulgar. And in one particular rant towards the end of his life, he was supposedly sat at a dinner table and said, "I am like a ripe shit, and the world is a gigantic arsehole. We will both probably let go of each other soon." Because we'll probably get carried away in our revolutionary zeal towards the end of the session, I want to thank Rethinking Economics for their organisational support to the event, and also for the production of the 33 theses with us, to IIPP for sponsoring the videoing of the event. So this will be available live on stream, so anything you cry out will be immortalised and stay in the ether forever. And also so everybody else can kind of share in it, and also for the Economist Society of UCL for their support as well, and obviously to our Reformationists, our panellists, who we'll be hearing from just in a moment. And we're going to have a little bit of a debate after that. One of the things we're going to invite you to do, if you get a chance to cast your eyes over the theses, we're going to have a little kind of a straw poll to see which of the different themes the theses look at you think are most important. And we are going to reorder the theses as a response to your straw poll voting later. And then, of course, most importantly, we want as many of you as possible to come with us in procession to actually get this revolution going, to nail the theses to the doors of the neighbouring academic institution, of which I'm an alumnus, the London School of Economics. But to put everything that we're going to discuss into context, we're going to invite someone to speak now who's perhaps got the longest view of anyone in the room on this issue, and that's Professor Victoria Chick, who is a friend of long standing and whose alive and brilliant and restless mind I became acquainted with when, with the New Economics Foundation a few years ago, we organised a conference on what we called at the time the Great Transition. And Victoria Chick, as the great Keynesian of this fine city of ours, we posed her a challenge. We said, given the epochal challenge of the environmental crisis, how do you square Keynes' approach to stimulus with the need to operate within environmental boundaries? In other words, how can you square Keynes and E.F. Schumacher? And never one to balk from a challenge, she did it, and she wrote the most elegant article which The Guardian published, and I would advise you to look that up online. So with that, I'm going to hand over to a far greater mind than mine, Victoria Chick, and when Victoria's finished, Larry will take over the chair, and he'll chair the panel, and then take questions from you, and then we're going to go through to a little bit of voting. So with that, I'd like to invite Victoria to speak.
Thank you, Andrew. Andrew butters me up on all possible occasions. It's a little bit embarrassing.
Victoria's like my giant piece of toast.
As you said, I've been in this business a long time, and it's changed very radically during that time. I want to start with how it is now, which you all know, actually. But it's worth drawing a parallel with religion. The present mainstream has many of the hallmarks of certain religions or certain aspects of religions. And this is well known. People have been commenting on this for a very long time. The particular qualities of mainstream economics that they share with religion, some religion, are that they think they have the truth, with a capital T. And you only have to listen to them as students of economics, listen to them and repeat what they say, and you will have a long and prosperous, gainfully employed, happy life, the earthly equivalent of heaven, I suppose. They have a god that they worship, it's called the market. And nothing can shake their belief. The fact that you can't demonstrate the existence on the ground of the things they profess to believe in is no impediment. Just believe and listen to me and repeat what I say, and we guarantee you a happy life. Now, I think it's really very important to change that attitude to one in which students are encouraged to read for themselves. That's what Luther did. The Catholic Church said, listen to me, listen to our priests, we will take care of your afterlife. Luther said, no, you don't need the mediation of priests. You read the literature, the Bible in his case, but in our case, literature for yourselves and make up your own mind. Almost nothing is done in mainstream economics today to encourage any student to think for him or herself. And this, to me, is not education. This is, at best, training, at worst, brainwashing. But it wasn't always thus. Dennis Robertson was said to have said something like, highbrow opinion is like a hunted hare. If you stand in the same place long enough, it will come around again.
The tolling of the bell.
And the nice thing from my point of view, from this long perspective, is that when I first came into economics, there was no particular mainstream. There was a variety of views. Sometimes people fought over them, sometimes they tolerated each other, but you could certainly learn about different perspectives. And the importance of that is that, of course, the mainstream took over and they grabbed all the levers of power, as you well know. But that change occurred, and change can happen again. And it's our purpose to make that change happen. The Reformation that we're launching tonight is part of making that happen. So don't despair. I mean, it is very difficult when you look at the way that the mainstream have grabbed all the levers of power and have squeezed out any dissent to imagine that it could ever change. But, you know, things do change, and suddenly and unpredictably. The Berlin Wall came down when nobody was sort of expecting it. And we can do the same in economics. Thank you.
Over to Larry.
Yeah, thank you all very much for coming along tonight. I can't tell you how happy I am to be chairing this session. It seems to me a great event, long overdue, the Reformation in Economics. What I'm going to do is ask each of the panellists to speak for up to 7 minutes. I'm trying to avoid them speaking for too long, because I really want this to be an event where the audience participates. That's the whole point of Reformation, which is that you listen to the congregation rather than the pearls of wisdom from on high. So we don't have a monopoly of wisdom here, but I am going to ask the panellists to say some words to start with. In the following order, I'm going to ask Kate Raworth to speak first. She's from Oxford University, the author of Donut Economics. And then I'm going to ask Steve Keane from Kingston University to speak second. He's written a book called Rethinking Economics. Then Mariana Mazzucato to speak third. She's here at the UCL. And finally I'm going to ask Sally Svenlen, who's the co-founder of Durham University's Rethinking Economics group, to finish things off. And then I'm going to open things up to the audience. I mean, I did say that I want to hear from you. I don't want to hear from you for too long, because if one person monopolises the whole thing, then it becomes a bit boring. So please do make your points. We want to hear from you. But if you ramble on for a bit long, I will be a bit brutal, as I will be with the panellists if they ramble on for too long. So yeah, I've got my hammer. Fortunately, it's only a plastic one, but I will be quite firm. So, Kate, perhaps you'd like to kick things off with some opening remarks.
Well warned about the hammer and furnace. Yeah, I'm delighted to be here because 25 years ago, I was a teenager emerging from the 1980s, having witnessed a famine in Ethiopia, gas disaster in Bhopal, Exxon Valdez spewing out its contents into Alaska, a hole in the ozone layer. And so all I knew is that I wanted to help change the world. And I believed that the best way to equip myself to help make that happen was to go to university and study economics, the mother tongue of public policy. I believed this would equip me with the language, the tools I needed to reshape the world and take on these challenges. So off I skipped, but found myself rapidly disappointed and frustrated in what I was taught, because the issue that I cared most passionately about, environmental integrity, social justice, I found were pushed to the margins of the syllabus. You had to hunt them out in obscure special papers if you really wanted to do that. And so I walked away from academic economics after 4 years because quite honestly, I never wanted to introduce myself as an economist. I thought that was an embarrassing way to introduce yourself to the world. So I walked away, spent 3 years in Zanzibar, 4 years at the UN, a decade with Oxfam, and found myself eventually walking back, really excited actually by seeing what the student movement were doing 25 years later, empowered with the internet to actually realise that, like me, they weren't the only ones, and actually there were others like them, and they have formed the most incredible movement to take this on. I've reflected in the book I've written, Donut Economics, on what it was that frustrated me so much in that education, and I've gone through my own re-education in economics in recent years. And the first thing was that we never actually asked some of the most important questions, like, what is the economy for? This question of purpose. We never asked it. And there was a sort of presumption that, well, growth, I mean, we haven't talked about it, but growth, if the economy's growing, then that's okay. We're getting growth coming here. If you dive back into the history, it's a fascinating story what happened there, because Adam Smith, when he talked about the art of political economy, he defined it by its purpose. He said it has two objects, to enable people to meet their own sustenance and needs from each other, and to enable the state, the public purse, to have enough money to provide public goods. It was John Stuart Mill who wanted to turn economics, or art of political economy, into the science of political economy. And once this science slipped in, well, now with science, if we're going to be scientists here, we don't have purpose, that needs to be removed. And the purpose was carefully removed in about the 1930s, when economists agreed that, Jacob Viner, I think, said, economics is what economists do, which should have you worried, given sometimes who the economists are. But it was just at the time when Simon Kuznets was coming up with this single number to measure a national income. And that slipped into the place, the empty nest. The cuckoo knows to occupy an empty nest, and where there is no purpose stated, a purpose will slip in, and I believe that GDP slipped in, like the cuckoo into the empty nest, and became the purpose for the economy. But of course, as economies have grown, and GDP has risen, yes, it's brought millions out of poverty, it's brought prosperity and Wi-Fi and iPhones to others, but of course, it's brought with it huge levels of inequality and huge levels of environmental degradation. So the global economy we have may be a growth economy, but it's also deeply divisive and degrading. Our politicians know it, but they too are trapped in this language where the only purpose we know is growth. And so I play a game that I call growth bingo. You listen for the adjective they're going to add. They'll call for smart growth, inclusive growth, resilient growth, green growth. Clean growth is a new one in this country. Equitable growth, balanced growth, sustained growth, any kind of growth you want, so long as you want growth. Because they're searching for a more powerful and more succinct definition of what actually prosperity is. The growth we have is deeply divisive, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so pleased to see that inequality is at the heart of these 33 theses. Because the economic theory that we learn is that inequalities that open up in society, they may arise because of difference in talents or a difference in effort. Whereas actually what we know is that in complex systems, a difference in early stages of luck or indeed inherited privilege spin people into completely different ends of income distributions. And we need to move away from the Kuznets curve, which apparently told us that as economies grow, things get less equal, but then they get more equal, and as growth happens, things will even up, except we know they don't, thanks to the work of Thomas Piketty. We need to revisit the inequalities that happen at the heart of the dynamic system, that is the economy. But also we have economies that are deeply degenerative, running down the living world. Again, the environmental Kuznets curve told us, if you worry about the planet, don't worry. You know, growth like a well-trained child will apparently clean up after itself. Except it doesn't. Not at the global scale. We need to move from an economic theory, which I believe so desperately wanted to be like science, that it was trying to mimic Newton's laws of motion. And we've been taught economic laws of motion, as if economies follow predictable patterns. I believe we have to let go of that fake physics. Economics is not about discovering laws of motion. It's about discovering, I believe, principles of design, designing complex adaptive systems of which we can be stewards. In which case, if that's the 21st century economics, which we can create economies that are distributive of opportunity and regenerative, working with the living world, suddenly I would be incredibly proud to be a 21st century economist, if that was what was being taught. What frustrates me, stepping back into a university setting, and I sometimes sit in on the economics lectures given in Oxford University, and for all that's been created and understood in the last 25 years, it still always starts with supply and demand. As if to say that the economy is the market and the market's in equilibrium. Well, that's two untruths in one sentence. It's not a good way to begin a degree. So it's time for this reformation, and I'm so impressed and thrilled that today's students have not only mobilized but have begun to build a global pressure, because this is such a deep irony at the heart of an economics education today. Students who choose to spend years of their life and an awful lot of money studying a subject they discover on arriving at university that the first thing they have to do is rewrite the syllabus. I don't think any other academic discipline runs itself this way. And so I hear it for the students, because it's for this student movement that the pressure is coming now from within the institution. And even though there's been pressure for decades, now I believe this reformation is going to begin. Thank you.
Very much, Kate. Smack on time. Didn't have to get the hammer out and install it. Right on the button. Steve, see if you can pick that.
I'll try to be as close as I can. Well, I think more than a reformation is needed. What I'm saying is we actually need a Copernican revolution in how economics is done, because there's one of the bylines of the movement for a long time has been you can't leave economics to the economists. No, you can leave science to the scientists. Why is economics different? And it's partly because, as both of the other speakers have said so far, there's a sense of religion to economics, a set of beliefs about not just what economics is, but how one has to be an economist. And after the financial crisis, finally we saw some challenges to that. These are people you can't see the names, so it's not putting up on the laptop. Let's go, okay. Let's go to these people. That's if we're lucky. Okay. People like Kosha Lakota, who was chairman of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve. Paul Romer, who's now running the World Bank Economics Department with apparently some interesting dynamics internally. Olivia Blanchard, who was a great proponent of DSG models, now saying they have problems. But the others remain defiant, and there's a couple of classic papers that have come out just recently. This bunch described anybody who doesn't like dynamics, stochastic general, equilibrium. That's the religion. To me, that's the real religion analytically. They described anybody who doesn't like these models as dilettantes because they can't make modelling statements. And just as was sent me today, Professor Rees from the LSE, I'm going to be enjoying that. I'll think about him as I'm having some of the nails in. If macro wasn't a crisis, well, they'd be publishing less articles on macroeconomics. Jesus Christ. Wouldn't be part of Hysidians, would it? And then he says a more accidental piece of evidence comes with this work on financial frictions. Now, frictions are the things that slow you down in a return to equilibrium. I regard finance as more of a lubricant than a friction. Okay, pardon me making a strong reference here. And they believe you can't do non-equilibrium modelling. This is a bizarre thing. And part of the problem is you can't change a paradigm if you don't realise you're in it. Okay? A fish can't suddenly get out and breathe the air. What's water? Ask a fish, they won't know what they're talking about. It encompasses them so much. So Yanis Varoufakis did a very nice job of talking about some elements of their paradigm. They always start from the individual and work up. They never imagine you can start from the aggregate and work down. They impose equilibrium even on models which are unstable. And if you know the mathematical foundations of DSG models, the core model in which they base it has an unstable equilibrium. They linearise around it and make it stable. Absolutely a travesty of economics, a travesty of mathematics. And they have a form of understanding about the economy which leaves money out. Of course, the crazy thing is people outside economics think economists are experts on money. What they're actually is experts on dreaming up reasons why you can model the economy without including banks, debt and money. And they're completely ignorant of complex systems modelling, which has become one of the dominant approaches in sciences in general, looking at non-linear dynamic interactions in complex systems, as Kate mentioned a moment ago. And I found this absolutely hilarious. Here's Professor Rees coming out and saying, well, comparing macro forecasts to forecast of average temperature or precipitation over the next 1 to 5 years makes us look a lot better. Don't say that in a meteorology conference, they'll laugh at you. Because writing in 1963, Lorenz pointed out, with a complex system, it's impossible by any method to forecast past a finite distance. You need an exponential increase in your knowledge of today's conditions to get a linear increase in how much decal you can make predictions sometime down the track. And after a while, forget it. You need to know the temperature of every point on the planet to 30 decimal places before you could predict the weather 2 or 3 years in advance. So it's simply nonsense. He'd be laughed. And he would deserve to be laughed at by meteorologists. This is what frustrates me particularly, because mainstream economists think they're the ones who do technical modelling. They're the ones who do the mathematics. Nobody else can do it. They're completely wrong. Biologists have developed non-equilibrium modelling way back in the 1920s, 1910s and 1920s. You have models of predator-prey interactions with unstable equilibria. Meteorologists, who are the main ones that have done this work, starting with Lorenz in 1963, realising an incredibly simple system. The entire model is on the screen there. There's three equations with three equations with three parameters. Now that generates this sort of complex behaviour as the foundation concept of the instability of a weather system. So it's possible to do non-equilibrium modelling, and this is an application of the same technology using my software package Minsky. So it can be done. And the terrible thing is the reason they can't reform themselves is they don't even know alternatives exist. I'm talking about the complex system stuff, but Vicky talked about the predecessors. They don't even know their own history. They think everything began with Lucas, whenever it was, at the 80s. They have no picture, the 80s and 70s. They have no picture. They don't even know these to be computable general equilibrium models. Okay? I told them what's that, most of them wouldn't know what the damn well are. So they don't know their own history, let alone the rest of economics, let alone what's happening in genuine sciences. So we need a reformation. Thank you.
Carry on.
Right, I'm going to stay sitting. We've been standing all day. We have a great speaker today, UCL, Jim Sakara, who's there. So we've had a full day of events, and I hope that Jim comes back in later. So I want to be a bit provocative in terms of also debating. Are we allowed to sort of disagree?
Sure.
Good. Okay. Which is, I actually think that the Reformation, or the revolution, will especially happen if we also critique the, let's just call it mainstream, or those who we think need to be sort of debunked on their own terms. So, for example, the sentence that was, I think, said in different ways, at least 2 or 3 times, that, you know, somehow the market is worshipped by Neoclassical Economics. I think we should actually start by saying they have the wrong theory of the market. Because otherwise, what we're presenting is an alternative to actually a historically, as well as, if you want, theoretically faulty framework.
Yeah.
And so I always start with Polanyi, who was, you know, like Adam Smith, extremely diverse in his own training. I mean, you could say Polanyi was both an economist, a historian, a sociologist, anthropologist, and in fact, that's very much where his strength came from, as well as Adam Smith's strength actually came from not just being a closed-minded economist, but Polanyi actually starts with the market, and he says that the capitalist market, which is, by the way, recent, there's nothing universal about it, there's no universal behavior that thinks in terms of markets, was actually forced into existence through policy. That's very different from sort of the local market, where you might buy fruit and vegetables at the local corner, which has actually existed before capitalism, or long-distance trade, long-distance markets. But the capitalist national market was forced into existence through policy. So the second point I would say is that, you know, that also means that markets are outcomes. They're actually outcomes of the interactions between all sorts of actors in the economy. And what we should be really studying in economics is the emergence of different types of markets. And we can, I think I'm a bit less worried about the term growth. I do think that if we redefine, not just making a list, yeah, this kind of growth, that kind of growth, but really actually actively shape and create the kinds of markets that we think would actually be able to you know, satisfy needs, but also address some big, complex challenges that are out there, whether it's climate change or other ones that people talk about. You know, the SDGs are out there. They've been actually signed up to by over 100 countries. What does that actually mean for different types of actors, public, private, third sector, civil society, to get together to actually work towards achieving the concrete goals that are inside those SDGs? That's just a different way to sort of position things from the start. Secondly, this point about science, and economics thinks that it's you know, tried to be too scientific. Again, it's so unscientific. I mean, if you think of the scientific method, it's exactly the opposite of what economists do. So again, critique them on their own ground. Don't say, you know, you're too scientific, too much math. It's the wrong kind of math. You know, they took the math from Newtonian physics when the physicists were actually rejecting that and going to more interesting sort of quantum stuff. And the reason they did that, and I actually think Phil Morowski is one of the best on this. He wrote this great book called More Heat Than Light, who was a professor of mine at Tufts. He says, you know, it wasn't the scientific method, which was like, okay, there's this thing out there, I want to understand it, whatever it is that someone's looking at, and here's a toolkit that I have with different tools, and I'm going to sort of use different tools to explore that space. It was actually, I want to prove that thing, which is things like unique equilibria, and actually this body of mathematics, Newtonian physics, which as you know is all focused on centers of gravity and unique equilibria, will help me prove that. right? So it's exactly the reverse of the scientific method. And again, what kind of math? The problem is not too much math. I mean, I think we need different types of methods, but it's again, there's all sorts of mathematical equations, for example, from biology that might be more useful. So in my PhD, actually, I used replicator equations, so distance from mean dynamics to actually look at growth. Whereas what Neoclassical Economics uses is a type of mathematics that actually focuses on the mean, on the average. So a biologist actually couldn't talk about growth if you just had representative agents, right? You actually look at the distance from the average, and then the question for depending what, sorry, this gets a bit complex, but how we would actually define the distance from the mean of what, that would depend on how you define fitness. Again, the complexity of the model might depend on exactly what you're doing, but even just starting off with saying they're using a particular type of mathematical equations that help them prove a particular type of result that they wanted to prove in the first place is, I think, a sort of a more radical position than saying too much math. Because otherwise, what you end up getting in both these situations of just allowing them to capture this word, this is about capture, the market, as well as capture this term, sort of science, is you get really also problematic behaviors in the economy. So you might get firms, right, companies, businesses, that blame the market for their own strategies or behaviors that we know are problematic. So for example, short-termism, right? So, yeah, I know we're short-termism, sorry, we're doing all these share buybacks, but it's because of the short-termism of the market, these market forces. So by dismantling that word, the market, and saying markets are outcomes, you also dismantle this really lame excuse, which is like, well, you know what? Just look at all these different sectors. For example, telecoms, there's lots of different types of companies that actually have very different types of behaviors. Again, that gets to the point of the representative agent. So you might have Huawei, #1 in the world, Chinese company, it's a cooperative. People don't realize that. I always tell Huawei, tell people you're a cooperative, they don't realize that. You're not just a state-owned company. You have Ericsson, which actually reinvests all its profits back into production, and then you have like Cisco, which is super financialized. So there's different things that actually companies can do, and these differences matter because different types of private, different types of public, different types of third sector, different types of civil society organizations are creating that market. So what we should really be focusing on a lot is, well, what's actually happening in these organizations? What do we know about, why certain organizations are more short-termism than the other? Don't let them use the market as sort of the excuse. The other thing, I mean, this is a bit ironic that I'm saying it here at UCL, so I'll try not to get personal, but there is a whole thing about rethinking economics in terms of the curriculum, which is out there, which I think is great, but it often, if we use this, again, I would say lame excuse of, oh, it's too mathematical, too scientific, then what's the solution? Make it user-friendly. So the curriculum, Rethinking Economics, is often just becomes a user-friendly version, a fun version with all these like really sort of real things out there, whether it's gender issues or climate change or race, that we use the standard body of economic theory to study, and we've just made it less mathematical. We're telling different stories, but the underlying assumptions remain the same. Anyway, let me move on. How much more time do I have?
1 minute.
No, that's not true. They spoke way much more than that. That was really quick.
You did that very, very good. You've had 7 minutes.
1 minute. I'll be super quick. 1 minute. So, and innovation is the thing that actually, so this is one of the, theses, which is we actually have to understand the motor of capitalism, which is innovation, and innovation itself creates all these differences. It's absolutely incredible that, on the one hand, innovation is the key driver of growth under capitalism. On the other hand, the body of economic thought that we study and teach in microeconomics all over the world actually doesn't allow you to understand innovation unless you introduce imperfect competition. And so Schumpeter's whole point was not just all this stuff about creative destruction. It was actually, we have the wrong theory of competition. Because the key driver of growth under capitalism is innovation, which causes constant differences in constant disequilibria. And in order to talk about disequilibria, it's always a transient state towards an equilibrium. Differences between agents are transient states towards some sort of average or representative agent. Lastly, actually I won't say lastly because I think I'm done.
Okay, good. Yeah. Time's up. Good. Thank you. So, you can stand okay?
Yeah, I'm here today to represent Rethinking Economics. For those who don't know what it is, it's one of the main organizations today leading the student movement to pushing for a change in the curriculum economics. as a second-year economics student among these four incredible economists, I'm obviously a bit intimidated, but I think that's just the group that I'm here to represent today. I think that our 33 thesis, which you might have had a look at, talks a lot about what in the economics discipline we have to change. But I'm going to talk about the last section, which is a bit more about the teaching economics and a bit more about maybe how we can achieve this. Because I think a large part of this reformation is making sure that our current economic students, and in other words, our future economists, have the right skills and understanding to bring this forward and deal with the issues that we currently face in the world. However, the main arguments we are met by when we claim that our curriculum is not teaching us the right things is that, you know, your models become more complex and realistic the higher up the degree level you come, going into masters and PhDs, etc. One of my microeconomics tutors, for example, very encouragingly told me recently that, you know, what you're learning now in your undergraduate is not actually economics. But, you know, independently of what you might claim, if it's more sort of realistic the higher up you come, I mean, economists don't only influence society through academia, because, I mean, of the 40,000 undergraduate economics students in the UK today, I mean, the vast majority of them will leave academia after these 3 years. And many of them will move in to obtain positions at different academic, financial, political institutions, where they will apply the knowledge from their degree and make decisions which, in one way or the other, will shape our society. Which is why our dear Paul Samuelson didn't really care about who ruled the country as long as he could write the economic textbooks. So, I mean, our economics degrees, our undergraduate economics degrees have a really determining role, which is why it's important that it's included in this discussion about sort of the economic discipline as a whole. So what are we actually claiming is wrong with our curriculum? Well, I think today's curriculum are characterized by two central things. I mean, most of the models that we do learn is mostly neoclassical, and sort of this technical aspect of economics, sort of being very skilled in mathematics and doing regression analysis, has been given a more kind of central role. And I think both of these really contribute to economics. I mean, they're both really important. But the problem is not their presence in our degrees, the problem is their dominance. Mm-hmm. Because what are we actually studying as economists? We're studying the economy, and the economy is not some like isolated entity. It's connected to all other parts of society and, you know, the natural environment. And it's also not some external entity we have no control over. I mean, we are the economy. We make up the economy, so obviously we have the authority to decide how we want it to be. So, I mean, therefore, because of this complex, interdisciplinary, normative nature of the economy, whilst neoclassical economics and all these kind of technical aspects are important, it's not sufficient to give us sort of a proper understanding of the entire economy and to be able to solve all these issues it will throw at us. We need, as students, to be encouraged to engage more critically in our subject, to ask the whys, you know, why are we using all these models, what's the purpose, and, you know, to really gain a holistic view of the economy. So, I mean, we've summarized some main points in this thesis, which I will not have time to go through in detail all of them, but I think one of the main points is that we should teach economics including a plurality of sort of theories and perspectives, and I mean, including sort of Austrian, post-Keynesian, institutional ecological economics. And I mean, the point of pluralism is by each theoretical approach encouraging the other to sort of challenge and reflect over their own assumptions and ideas, we can bring the discipline as a whole forward. And some more other ideas is, for example, including more historical and philosophical aspects when we're actually introduced to the models, to understand sort of their context, their background, what ethical ideas actually underpin them. And also that we should, you know, be taught to apply more of the models to real world issues and actually be able to determine ourselves if they actually fit like real world cases, because the world is always sort of changing, so models also have to change. And also this sort of that we need to be taught in a more interdisciplinary approach. Because I mean, if you look at all of the historical, major economists, they've not only been economists, just as Mariana said, Adam Smith, Keynes, Schumpeter, like all of these, I mean, they were more philosophers, they talked about politics, all these other aspects which the economy is connected to. So I think the key changes we're talking about here is sort of a result of the recent years campaigning and reflecting upon how we can really improve the curriculum. And I think this discussion needs to continue, as reforming the curriculum will be a long and sort of gradual process. But I think by including these elements step by step, we can create an economics curriculum which really develops critically thinking students who really understand all the aspects of the economy. And I think as a last point, I think one of the main objections to these propositions might be, will economists be as employable, or will economists be able to give policymakers as definite and sort of rigorous answers if they're learning all these perspectives and methodologies? And I think partly this might be just like a reflection of the physics envy still present in economics, because and envy being this overuse of mathematical tools trying to be as precise as physics. But economists in terms of technical skills will never be able to compete with physicists and mathematicians and computer scientists. Even though it's important that we know these technical skills, what distinguishes us is being able to understand our area, the economy. And so if we exclude all the other social science subjects, if we exclude all the other schools, if we exclude all the more sort of human and human aspects of the economy, we'll obviously not be able to understand it properly and will not be able to solve the issues. So that's what we're sort of campaigning for.
Andrew, do you want to do your audience participation now or later?
Well, we could kind of chip it in now, then we get to hear straight from them, don't we?
I think that's a good idea.
So the thought is that the theses that you see before you haven't completely come out of the blue. We did speak to a lot of people. Lots of people have had input into them, but they are just our offer up for debate. And there was quite a lot of discussion around which were kind of which areas carried more weight. So we were just very interested to hear from you what you think. And what I'm going to invite you to do, this is going to be a completely random first hand up process. If anybody would like to speak up for the importance of any one of the sections, I would give you 60 seconds to make your case. And as many advocates for the different sections, I see a hand already, we will take. We don't have to do them all. And then we'll do a quick straw poll on what we think is most important. So if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us which section you're speaking on behalf of, and I will count you 60 seconds from now.
Hi, I'm Desne. I'm a fellow in International Political Economy at School of Governance in South Africa. I have several points to make very, very quickly within 60 seconds. Mariana, you mentioned this kind of leaning towards short-termism, but then made continuing patterns of behaviour. I just don't think that's true. I mean, there's a movement called Focusing Capital on the Long Term, and BlackRock, Tata, a bunch of people in the so-called markets, have been thinking about this quite seriously. And then, this is very heretical. The whole kind of the 30...
We're all about heresy. That's fine.
No, but the whole 33 thesis, it's kind of... This is part of mainstream thinking. I mean, there was Occupy Economics 10 years ago where these issues were raised. I mean, my neoclassical training, I did an interdisciplinary PhD, but my neoclassical training is also valuable to my world set. And I don't see global south in any of this. 60 seconds.
Okay, thank you. But not arguing for any particular importance of any particular thematic area. That's fine.
Yeah,
that's fine. You can use your 60 seconds airtime however you like.
Yeah.
Let's take another one, and then I'm sure the panel will get a chance to come back. Any more? Nobody thinks anything's important or anything more important than anything else. There's a hand there. Yes, sir.
Manuel Lubina, Greenwich, and ISR Political Economy Research Fellow. One section I would like to subscribe fully is the purpose of the economy, because if we don't start from there, we don't know where to go. And I think that June was emphasizing that today, and I would like to thank June for that. Something that's missing a bit, the elephant in the room, is the role of the public sector. One of the things that we were talking about today was that the public sector has major implication at the macro, meso, and micro level. I see that it's number 10 that's talking a bit about public organizations at the micro level. I think perhaps it's a bit constrained. Other than that, great job and purpose of the economy.
Excellent. So all sorts with purpose, and we need a little bit more focus on the public. And I should say at this point that if people want to put their comments out there in public, if you go onto the New Weather website, there's a comments section, and you can make comments on it, and we'd love to have as much engagement as possible. So I saw another hand over here. Yes, sir.
I think it's very good. I would say...
Can you say you are?
Charlie led me to various places. I would say that in general there's a danger that you end up fighting the last war rather than the next war. And I think there's a lot more about purpose. So I think in Kate's book there's a lot more about purpose, which is much more ambitious and than this currently is, more exciting, I suppose. And secondly, I would say counter slightly to this gentleman's comments over here. I just wonder what people think about the relationship between, on the one hand, you want an economy which is less unequal, more equal, for which the state is going to be very, very important. But you also want an economy which is highly collaborative, open, and innovative, for which the state can often be clumsy. And so again, back to Kate's book, she talks a lot about systems which are distributed by design. The flows of resources are designed to be that way, not the state necessarily correcting things, but designing systems which are regenerative and distributed. And I just wonder if there's enough of that in here. And then finally, in relation to that, whether there's anything really about the power of social movements to make markets, because I think one of the most important things is that movements make markets. And actually there isn't enough about movements for me.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. That's very good. And I should also say the little kind of caveat to this is that there was no attempt to make these comprehensive. They were what we could agree in the short period of time between deciding to do this and making it happen. And we very much see it as just a kind of a catalyst to further debate. And just getting agreement on this was not a straightforward process with all the people involved. But yeah, it's sorry, woman there, and then we'll go to the gentleman at the back. Yes.
Okay, my name is Sandra. So I don't see word tax mentioned. I can imagine that maybe it's meant behind the distribution of wealth and stuff, but I think it was really important to emphasize the tax as a currency of social contract and social contract as such, and recognize that it's, I think, also a crucial part of economy. So that would be my point, because also like if the trend is going on, then the corporate income tax by 2052 will be zero. I don't think this is sustainable, and clearly, this has to be more recognized. And maybe I agree also with the previous commentator saying that maybe it's too much reference to the current model, as if we are criticizing rather than actually saying this is what we propose. Yeah, like inequality section, I think it's the language is shaped around what isn't working rather than okay, how do we address that.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. And with your comments, excellent comments. If you would like to put them online so that we could broaden the debate, that would be absolutely fantastic. And I think it's always great. You always get picked up on things you don't say rather than things you do say quite often. At one stage, the draft was that long, and then it got shorter and shorter and shorter. Gentleman at the back, yeah, and then we'll come over here.
Hi, I'm Greg. I think 27 is really important. Economics needs a better understanding of health and stability and crises to be created internally within markets rather than treating them as shocks that affect markets and outside. I mean, we're talking about economics, and I don't think anyone's mentioned the 2008 financial crash yet. Obviously, it's kind of a big...
We're all still in shock.
Yeah, and we constantly, like, have people try and explain it or tackle it within the mainstream, but no one's like done a decent job of sort of trying to really comprehend how that sort of was a part the market itself, and I think stuff like that needs to be thought more head on.
Okay, I'm sure we'll get some reactions to that. Let's take that gentleman there. Oh, sorry, no, we had you first. We'll have you first, and then we'll come to that gentleman over there, and then down the front row.
Okay, because I was sort of following on in terms of talking about the
Could
inequality.
you just say you are?
Rebecca Saville. So I would agree the purpose of economics has to come at the top. And I find the environment very important as well. But between those two, I'd like to put society. And society isn't quite in here. There's a section on inequality, but one of the purposes of economics is to mould our society. So we should be talking about what makes a good society. And I've just been doing a little bit of reading about Muir's chickens, and I think we've very much got a society that's rewarding the vicious self.
For those who don't know, would you like to introduce the chickens?
He did some research. He was a biologist doing some research on egg production. So they had cages of 9 hens, and he did one breeding experiment where they took the most productive hen in each cage and bred from that for the next generation. And a second experiment where they took the most productive cage and bred from all 9 hens. And where they took the most productive individuals, in very short time, they ended up with murderous hens. And the photo in the article I was showing, it had the cage that had 9 hens in, had 3 left because the other 6 had been killed. And of course that meant egg production dropped dramatically. Whereas when you were breeding from the cooperative, from the most productive group, then egg production went up dramatically in very few generations because they were cooperating.
I can't explain why, but I've got an image of Donald Trump as a giant chicken. Anyway, that's very good. Do you want to finish your point,
So
man?
that's the multi-level selection. But the neoclassical economics is promoting the individualistic, and actually that's not good for production. But the overall thing was that society should be nearer the top because the purpose of economics is to mould a good society that's going to work for all the individuals.
It's a good point, well made. Let's go over to that man there.
Yeah, my name's Josh. I work at the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose at ECR. I think we're missing a factor of production, unfortunately. Land, which I think is quite important.
Is that nothing to do with anything you've written recently?
No, nothing to do with the book that I've written recently. But very important in a city like London where nobody can afford to live. So I'd like to see that put back in here somewhere, probably in the labour and capital section would be the best place for it. And I just had a question for the panel. Don't know if we're allowed to ask questions.
Chip it in, you've got 15 seconds.
The first point is no economic goal can be separated from politics. Indicators of success represent political choices. I just wonder if the panel felt we should just go back to calling economics political economy.
Yeah.
To make things move more.
Well, I think that. Josh has actually written a very good book about land reform, which you should all buy, by the way. Down on the front row.
Hi, I'm Maeve. I'm from Rethinking Economics. I'm going to say something that's very obvious for Rethinking Economics person to say, but all of the points that people are making are incredibly important and valuable, and we should learn about these things and these different ways of thinking in our degrees. And I think the most important section in this thesis is the education section, because until we reform that, we can't achieve any of the other points in it.
Good point, well made. Right, now, let's take a woman at the back there, and then we'll go to the gentleman there, and then woman there, and then gentleman over there, and then keep them really short, then we get as many in as possible. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I'm Joanna. I'm DSAN at the University of Surrey and Ecolab and some other places. I think the 33 are great, they're good. I really like them. I haven't read them completely, but I think that what really matters is the first 3 and the beginning, because let's face it, most people won't read 33.
That's why you put 3 really short ones at the front.
Are not good at all. They're not visionary, they're too wordy, they're too abstract, and I think that the 2 from Kate's book, the distributive and regenerative, and the unscientific from Marina's talk, those 3 ideas for me, those unscientific captures what's wrong with economics as it is, and then the other 2, the regenerative and the distributive, captures the social and the ecological. And so what needs to happen is that this needs to be a lot more snappy and catchy. And
You should have seen what we started with. Good, yes, if we'd had longer we'd have made it shorter, as the line goes. Please go on the website and put those comments up there so we can get a discussion going with the outside world. That'd be great. You, sir.
Right. Hi. Josh's point about politics, I think, still isn't strong enough. My name is Dill Green. I'm not an economist. Luther made it very clear that the church was acting as a proxy for the power elite, using stories about God in the service of power. This document completely fails to note the structural condition of economists in society, which is that they are talking about the mechanics of what keeps the power elite on top at the moment. How can an economist even begin to consider how they say what they need to say, how they study what they need to say, unless that topic is well understood and discussed between and by economists and in relation to the people that they work with?
Excellent, good point, well
made.
made.
Very unfortunate position in the world as economists. It's dangerous and it's frightening to talk.